Hey, so I wanted to do a video on cultivating healthy relationships and avoiding abusive ones. I think many people often think that abuse has to be physical. When people think of abusive relationships, I know that's what I think of. Immediately my mind goes to one person hitting another, and while that is obviously an example of an abusive relationship, abuse can be mental as well, or verbal. I know a lot of people, when they are in the process of fighting, words can be said and things can get pretty ugly. And realistically, if these things happen once in the blue moon, all right, well, it doesn't mean you're not in a healthy relationship. People make mistakes. But people who constantly berate and belittle the other person in the relationship, or even if it goes both ways and you both verbally berate one another, you may be in an abusive relationship. And let's talk about the obvious for a minute. Nobody should be in a physically abusive relationship. And I know a lot of times when we think about physical abuse, we think about the man hitting the woman. And yes, that is probably the most common. But I actually was speaking to a gentleman, and I'm not going to get into names. I don't want to embarrass anybody. Definitely not, because this man is a really good man. But he contacted me about 3-4 weeks ago asking for help for his fiancée, who needs to get into treatment for her addiction. And while I was in the process of working on that, I ended up receiving an email, which was a couple days later, from the gentleman. And he said that he just got out of the hospital. Now, I want to backtrack just for a second here. He actually does have a terminal illness. So, unfortunately, he happens to have a disease that is killing him. And I don't mean addiction, although addiction can kill too. But I'm talking about a terminal illness like cancer. I'm not saying it is cancer, but it's a terminal illness like cancer. And it is literally killing him. So he will die from this disease. And it's horribly sad. I really feel for this guy. He's such a good guy. And so he apparently just got out of the hospital because his fiancée, I guess, in the process of withdrawing or needing more heroin, literally beat the shit out of him and used a weapon and almost killed him. So he had to go to the hospital. I'm pretty sure he had a concussion. I'm pretty sure he had a lump on his head, if I remember correctly. And the situation is just awful. So apparently she did go to jail, but she was only in jail for about 2 days, and then she came home. Now, I have not received an update since then. I know that in my discussion with him, I was encouraging him to leave the relationship, or at least temporarily part ways until she gets the help that she needs, whatever that might be. I don't know what is going on in her head. Obviously, we know she suffers from addiction, but realistically, no matter what, having a disease does not absolve you of responsibility for your actions, and you are responsible for them. So if you commit a crime and you try to use, well, I'm an addict, I have a disease, as an excuse, I don't think people should have sympathy for you. I mean, in all of my time as an addict, when I was suffering from active addiction, I wasn't beating the shit out of people, and I didn't commit crimes other than the obvious, which was going to get my drug of choice. But I think ultimately people need to understand that they need to be responsible. When you have a disease of addiction, you are responsible to get the help and treatment that's necessary to get well. If I was diagnosed with diabetes, I would alter my diet. I would do whatever I can to lose weight and minimize my risks so that diabetes doesn't kill me. So why wouldn't I do the same thing for addiction? I understand that they're two very different diseases. One's a brain disease, one's I guess you could say, a disease of the body. I don't know exactly how you characterize it. I'm not a doctor, but they are very different. But that being said, when you understand that you suffer from addiction, you are responsible for getting help. You are also responsible for anything you do to hurt somebody or yourself even in the process before you get help and during getting help. I mean, just because you're getting help doesn't absolve you of responsibility if you decide in the midst of getting help, say, oh, well, I'm getting help already, but so I have an excuse. No, you don't have an excuse. You deserve to be punished. Sorry, you just do. And people may want to throw stones at me for saying that, But, you know, realistically, I'm very, very sympathetic and empathetic to people who suffer from addiction, because I do too. I'm a recovering addict, but I do not justify actions of criminal behavior or abuse or hurting somebody else mentally, physically, whatnot. Now, look, people do make mistakes. I get that. I'm not suggesting that if you are physically abusive that you should justify that as a mistake, but I understand that people might get in a verbal war and curse at each other once in a blue moon, apologize, kiss and make up, all is well for the next 3 months before maybe another episode. For the most part, maybe you're in a healthy relationship. But people who are verbally berating and abusing each other on a regular basis, well, that's very different. You may be in a verbally abusive relationship. And neglect, by the way, is another form of abuse. So just because you aren't verbally berating your spouse or fiance or boyfriend or girlfriend, if you're ignoring them and neglecting their needs, that's a form of abuse too. It's not a very common form of abuse, but it is one. And I want to say something that may be considered very controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. You can sexually abuse your partner. What I mean by that is not that you should be allowed to, meaning that that is criminal behavior. Just because you're in a relationship with somebody doesn't give you the right to have sex with them anytime you want. So you need to be really careful of that too. You need to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Role play is role play, or whatever you want to say, but at the end of the day, you need to understand that if your partner is not in the mood, you can't just force them to have sex and say, well, that's my spouse, or that's my partner, I'm allowed to do. No, you're not. You need to respect that they're an individual, and you can't just decide to have a sexual relationship or a sexual moment with them just because you want it. If they don't want it, you need to wait until they're ready too. And that's whether you're male or female. I don't discriminate. I know I just told a story, for those who are just tuning in, about a male who was physically beaten almost to death by his female fiance, and obviously it can happen that way. He happens to be terminally ill and not in a position to defend himself, and even if he could, he wouldn't. I know he even told me that he wouldn't even want to defend himself because he doesn't want to get put in jail for quote-unquote hitting a woman. And honestly, I don't blame him. He shouldn't hit a woman at all. Absolutely not. But I think if somebody's being physically beaten to the point of almost dying, you need to do something to get her off. And I'm not suggesting hitting her, but you need to at least restrain her or something, because you can't let someone beat you to death. I don't care if you're male or female. And if you are the weaker partner in the relationship and you're being abused, get the hell out of there. Honestly, even if you're the stronger partner being abused, get the hell out of there, because most of the time, and hopefully normal people, even if they are the stronger partner, aren't abusing or shall I say hitting the person who's abusing them. I mean, somebody's hitting somebody doesn't give the other person a right to hit them back. I think ultimately you can restrain or get the hell out of Dodge, but at the end of the day, I don't think anybody should be hitting each other. So there's physical abuse, there's mental abuse, there's sexual abuse. Yes, it all does happen and can happen in relationships. I think a lot of people are under the misconception that sexual abuse isn't a real thing in a relationship, but it is. People in a relationship do have the right to say no. I don't care if you put a ring on it. They still have the right to say no. They got a headache, leave them the hell alone. Wait until they don't. Whatever the excuse is, doesn't matter. Now, obviously, if you are in a relationship where sex is a problem and you're never having it, well, that could be looked at as a form of neglect and another form of abuse, but that does not ever give you the right to force yourself upon somebody. If you have that much of a problem in a relationship, try to talk about it, go to counseling, and God forbid, worst case scenario, can't work it out, leave the relationship and get into another. But you never have an excuse to hit somebody, to sexually abuse somebody, or even mentally abuse them. So anyway, I did want to say a few words on that. I understand that it's not directly related to addiction, but addiction does breed a lot of abusive behavior. So I think people need to be aware that there is a connection between them, and so people need to be really careful when they're getting involved in relationships, especially if you are still living an active addiction and you may be even thinking of a situation right now that either you are involved in or you know somebody who's involved in one, and you just hope and pray every day that these people get smart enough to leave a relationship that isn't healthy for them. So anyway, let's hope and pray for these people. Let's pray they come forward, get the help they need. If it's addiction related, obviously we're certainly willing to do whatever we can and do our part to help these people get the help they need, get the treatment they need, find a quality treatment center. If it happens to be abuse related, there are helplines available as well. So please get help. Please get out of a relationship that's abusive. So anyway, thank you for watching. Please leave a comment below and visit our website, www.killtheheroinepidemicnationwide.org, or the shorter version, heroinawareness.org, and kthen.org, etc. I buy a lot of domain names. What can I say? Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Peace and love.